What if Rome was not the beginning of the story? What if, beneath the roads, temples, rituals, and power that later made Rome feel eternal, there was an older Italy already alive with hilltop cities, sacred fires, painted tombs, sea trade, forest paths, and words carved into stone in languages that no longer speak easily to us? Imagine central Italy before Rome became Rome. The night is soft over the hills. Mist gathers in the valleys. A river moves slowly through dark reeds. On a distant ridge, small fires burn inside an ancient settlement, and beyond it, farther west, the coast lies under moonlight, where ships wait quietly beside the black water. Somewhere beneath the earth, a tomb chamber is painted with dancers, musicians, banquets, animals, and faces that still seem strangely alive after more than 2,000 years. Somewhere above, on a high place, priests watch the sky for signs. Somewhere near the Tiber, a young city is growing. Not yet mistress of the world. Not yet the name that will fill maps, histories, ruins, laws, and memory. Just one city among others. And that is the mystery we are entering tonight. Who lived in Italy before the Romans rose to power? And how much of Rome was shaped by the older world it grew from? The Italy before Roman dominance was not empty. It was not waiting silently for Rome to arrive. It was already a landscape of peoples, settlements, rituals, trade routes, rival powers, and sacred places. Archaeology shows that long before the Roman Empire, and long before Rome controlled the peninsula, communities across Italy were building, farming, trading, burying their dead with care, honoring gods, making art, and shaping their own worlds. Rome did not rise from nothing. It rose from older ground. To understand that older ground, we have to slow down and walk through Italy before empire. Not the Italy of marble forums and imperial roads. Not the Italy of legions moving in disciplined lines. But an earlier Italy. A land of hills, rivers, forests, coastlines, volcanic lakes, fertile valleys, mountain passes, and scattered towns whose names still echo faintly from ancient sources and buried ruins. In the center, the Tiber River moved through the land, carrying water, clay, fish, trade, and memory. Around it, communities formed in places where the ground rose above marsh and floodplain. On ridges and hills, people built settlements that could see far across the landscape. In valleys, fields were planted. In forests, animals moved through shadow. Along the coast, ships connected Italy to other parts of the Mediterranean world. This was not one culture. It was many. The Latins lived in Latium, the region where Rome itself would rise. The Sabines lived in the hills nearby, remembered in Roman tradition as close neighbors and rivals. The Etruscans held power in central Italy, especially in the region later known as Etruria, north of Rome. Greek communities flourished in southern Italy and Sicily, in the world often called Magna Graecia. Other peoples lived across the peninsula too, each with their own languages, customs, gods, alliances, and rivalries. To imagine pre-Roman Italy as a single world would be too simple. It was more like a woven cloth. Different threads. Different colors. Different patterns crossing. And Rome, at first, was only one thread. The later Romans told stories about their own beginnings, stories of Trojan ancestry, of Romulus and Remus, of wolves, kings, omens, and sacred founding. These ancient literary traditions mattered deeply to Roman identity, but they are not the same as straightforward historical record. They are memory, myth, politics, and explanation woven together. Archaeology gives another kind of picture. It shows Rome developing among neighboring communities, influenced by and competing with the wider world around it. The early city stood in a place of importance, near the Tiber, close to routes between inland and coast, between Latin lands and Etruscan power to the north. Its position mattered. Its neighbors mattered. Its contacts mattered. Rome was not born already eternal. It became powerful over time. And before that happened, the older Italy around it was already awake. Picture the hills before dawn. A settlement stands on a rise of earth and stone. Its houses are not marble palaces. They are made of timber, clay, thatch, and local materials. Smoke rises from small hearths. A path leads down toward fields. Another path runs toward a ford in the river. People move quietly in the morning light, carrying tools, water, baskets, offerings. This is not a primitive world. It is a human world. Organized around land, family, labor, belief, memory, and exchange. A person living there might know the next village by kinship or rivalry. They might know which hill belonged to which group, where to find a sacred grove, where the dead were buried, which path was safe in winter, which market carried metal goods, pottery, salt, oil, or cloth. The landscape was filled with meaning. A hill was not just a hill. It could be a settlement, a defensive place, a sacred height, a marker of belonging. A river was not just water. It could be a boundary, a route, a source of life, a place of crossing, a place where offerings were made. A tomb was not just a place for the dead. It could be a house of memory. A painted chamber. A family statement. A doorway between the visible world and whatever people imagined came after. This is one of the quiet secrets of ancient Italy. Much of its earliest history was not written first in books. It was written in places. In walls. In graves. In imported goods. In pottery styles. In metalwork. In city plans. In inscriptions. In the way roads followed ridges and rivers. In the way sacred places looked toward sky, hill, or boundary. When we walk into this world, we have to listen differently. Not for the voice of Rome alone. But for the many voices Rome later stood among, borrowed from, fought against, absorbed, and transformed. Along the southern coasts, Greek cities looked across the sea. Ships brought goods, ideas, artistic styles, myths, and forms of writing. Greek influence in Italy was powerful and complex, especially in the south, where colonies became important centers of culture and trade. To the north and center, Etruscan cities grew wealthy from land, metals, craftsmanship, and maritime connections. They traded across the Mediterranean, receiving and adapting influences from Greeks, Phoenicians, and others while also creating a vivid culture of their own. In the Latin communities, including early Rome, local traditions developed in constant contact with neighbors. No culture here existed in isolation. Italy before Rome was connected by movement. A ship sliding along the coast at dusk. A trader carrying goods inland. A family crossing into another territory for marriage. A craftsman learning a foreign style and making it local. A ritual idea moving from one city to another. A symbol of power passing from older hands into new ones. This is how ancient worlds grow. Not by pure invention in isolation. But by contact. By adaptation. By rivalry. By imitation. By resistance. By memory. And this is why the rise of Rome becomes more mysterious, not less, when we look at what came before. If Rome did not rise from emptiness, then what did it inherit? What did it learn from neighbors? What did it take and remake? What did it absorb so completely that later generations forgot it had once belonged to someone else? These questions lead us toward the Etruscans. But before we enter their painted tombs and hilltop cities, we should stay a little longer in the wider world of early Italy, because that world explains why Rome's story cannot begin with Rome alone. Imagine the Tiber at night. The water is dark and slow. Reeds move along the bank. Somewhere nearby, animals shift in their pens. A fire burns near a hut. Across the river, another settlement's lights are barely visible. The crossing matters. Whoever controls it controls movement, trade, contact, and perhaps the future. Early Rome grew near such a crossing. Its hills offered places to settle. Its river linked inland and coast. Its position placed it between Latin and Etruscan spheres, between local communities and wider exchange. From the beginning, Rome stood in a world of thresholds. And threshold places often become powerful. They gather strangers. They gather goods. They gather languages. They gather gods. They gather danger. A settlement at a crossroads must learn quickly. It must protect itself, but also open itself. It must remember its own customs, but understand the customs of others. It must trade, negotiate, watch, borrow, and compete. This early Rome was not yet the conqueror of the Mediterranean. It was a participant in a crowded Italian world. Ancient literary tradition would later remember kings in Rome's earliest period, including rulers associated with Etruscan influence or origin. Scholars debate how much history stands behind these traditions, but the stories themselves suggest something important. Later Romans remembered that their city's early development was deeply entangled with Etruscan power and culture. Even Roman memory could not fully erase the older world. It had to explain it. Sometimes through legend. Sometimes through royal names. Sometimes through rituals whose origins were placed in a sacred past. The idea that Rome had once learned from others did not make Rome weak. It made Rome more real. Every powerful culture begins inside a world already full of power. And Italy was full of it. In the forests and hills, people honored gods whose names are partly lost to us. On high ground, communities watched weather, birds, and signs in the sky. At burial grounds, families placed objects with the dead, perhaps to show status, affection, hope, or belief in an afterlife. Along the coast, imported pottery and luxury goods moved between hands, carrying stories of distant places. A bronze vessel could travel farther than the person who used it. A painted cup could bring a Greek myth into an Italian tomb. A foreign alphabet could be adapted to write local languages. A ritual gesture could pass from one people to another, changing meaning as it moved. The ancient Mediterranean was not still. It breathed. And pre-Roman Italy breathed with it. This is important because Rome later became so large in memory that it can seem to swallow everything before it. When people think of ancient Italy, they often see Rome first. Legions. Senators. Emperors. Aqueducts. Roads. Latin. Law. Marble. But before that image hardened, Italy was softer, older, more varied, and more mysterious. There were towns whose names Rome would later conquer. Gods whose identities would be translated or reshaped. Families whose tombs would outlast their cities. Languages that would fade as Latin spread. Symbols of authority that would pass into Roman hands and become part of Roman state ceremony. The past did not vanish. It changed names. One of the most haunting ways we see this older world is through its dead. Across ancient Italy, burial sites preserve traces of identity and belief. Among the Etruscans especially, tombs became places of extraordinary artistic expression. In places like Tarquinia, painted tombs show scenes of banquets, dancers, musicians, animals, rituals, and mythic imagery. These images do not give us a simple explanation of Etruscan belief, but they do show a society that imagined death with color, movement, status, and memory. The dead still speak through painted walls. Not clearly. Not completely. But enough. A hand raised in music. A figure reclining at a banquet. A dancer turning beneath painted branches. A horse. A bird. A doorway. A name carved in stone. A language that can be read in many inscriptions, but still leaves large parts of the Etruscan inner world beyond our reach. This is not because the Etruscans were unknowable in some magical sense. It is because the kinds of texts that would explain their world in their own voice have not survived in the way later Roman literature survived. We know them through archaeology, inscriptions, art, tombs, objects, and through what Greek and Roman writers said about them, often from outside perspectives. So there is always a veil. A thin one in some places. A heavy one in others. And behind that veil was one of the most important civilizations of pre-Roman Italy. Like travelers moving through mist toward a hilltop city. The road climbs. The valley falls away. The first walls appear at the ridge. Far below, a river turns toward the sea. Behind us lies the young city of Rome, still growing, still learning, still not yet ruler of the world. Ahead lies Etruria. A land of powerful cities, wealthy tombs, sacred signs, bronze mirrors, carved stones, painted banquets, sea trade, ritual knowledge, and names that seem to glow faintly from the edge of history. Among all the older peoples of Italy, one civilization stood out. Not because it was simply a prelude to Rome. Not because Rome copied it completely. But because it was vivid, wealthy, influential, mysterious, and deeply connected to the future Rome would inherit. The Etruscans. And if we want to understand what Rome rose from, we have to descend into their tombs, climb toward their cities, and listen for the older Italy still whispering beneath the Roman road. To enter the Etruscan world, imagine climbing a hill in central Italy before sunrise. The valley below is still covered in mist. Oak woods darken the slopes. Far away, the sea catches the first pale light, and somewhere between the coast and the hills, roads are already waking with movement, traders, animals, carts, travelers, and people carrying goods from one city to another. At the top of the hill stands an Etruscan city. Not a ruin yet. Not a mystery yet. A living place. Its walls follow the shape of the high ground. Its gates open toward paths that descend into farmland, forests, and roads leading to other cities. Smoke rises from houses. Metalworkers begin their day. Potters prepare clay. Families wake. Priests watch the sky. Merchants think of ships and harbors, of Greek pottery, Eastern luxury goods, metal, wine, oil, and all the things that made the Mediterranean feel both wide and connected. This was not Rome before Rome. It was Etruria. A world with its own cities, its own language, its own religious traditions, its own art, its own ambitions, and its own deep memory. The Etruscans lived mainly in central Italy, especially in the region between the Arno and Tiber rivers, though their influence and presence extended beyond those borders at different times. Archaeology shows a network of wealthy city-states rather than one unified empire in the later Roman sense. Cities such as Tarquinia, Cerveteri, Veii, Volsci, Chiusi, and others formed part of this complex world. Each city had its own life. Its own families. Its own tombs. Its own gods and rituals. Its own alliances and rivalries. To imagine the Etruscans as one shadowy group waiting to be absorbed by Rome is to miss what made them extraordinary. They were a civilization of cities before Rome became a great power. And one of the most powerful ways they speak to us is not through palaces or battle accounts, but through the places they made for the dead. Etruscan tombs can feel strangely alive. That is the first mystery. We descend underground expecting silence, and find color. A painted chamber opens beneath the earth. The ceiling may be shaped like a house roof, as if the tomb itself were another dwelling. The walls glow with scenes of banquets, musicians, dancers, animals, processions, games, and figures moving in a world between memory and belief. A man reclines at a feast. A woman appears beside him. Musicians play. Dancers turn. Birds fly across painted space. Servants carry cups. Animals leap. The dead are not shown only as absent. They are surrounded by life. This does not mean we know exactly what every image meant. We must be careful. Scholars interpret these tomb paintings through comparison, archaeology, inscriptions, and the broader Mediterranean world, but Etruscan belief is not preserved for us in a complete Etruscan religious book or long historical account written in their own voice. The images may show aristocratic identity, funerary ritual, ideas of the afterlife, memory of status, family ideals, symbolic journeys, or many layers at once. But whatever their full meanings, the effect is unforgettable. The dead still speak through painted rooms. Not in words. In gestures. In color. In music without sound. In the strange feeling that death, for the Etruscans, was not imagined only as darkness, but as a passage into a world where feasting, movement, and memory continued in some transformed way. Picture standing in one of these painted tombs by lamplight. The air is cool. The walls are old. The figures are faded, but still present. The painted eyes look outward from centuries before Rome became an empire. Their clothes, cups, instruments, horses, and gestures belong to a society that wanted to be remembered. Above ground, the city may have changed. The language may have faded. The families may be gone. But below, the banquet still waits. This is why the Etruscans feel so near and so hidden at the same time. We can see them, but not completely understand them. Their language adds another layer to the mystery. Etruscan inscriptions can often be read in the sense that scholars know the alphabet and can pronounce many texts. Many inscriptions are short, names, dedications, ownership marks, funerary phrases. They tell us valuable things, especially about individuals, families, gods, and social identity. But the language is not Indo-European like Latin or Greek, and because long explanatory texts are rare, large parts of its vocabulary and deeper literature remain limited or uncertain. So the stones speak, but softly. A name carved on a tomb. A dedication on a mirror. A phrase on a vessel. A family line. A god's name. Enough to prove that a voice existed. Not enough to let us hear every thought behind it. This partial silence has made the Etruscans seem more mysterious than many ancient peoples, but the mystery should not make them unreal. They were not a riddle invented for us. They were people living complete lives in their own time. They built. They traded. They worshipped. They loved. They buried their dead. They displayed status. They made art. They raised families. They competed with neighbors. They watched the sky. They shaped Rome's early world, while also being shaped by the wider Mediterranean around them. Their cities were connected to trade across the sea. Etruscan elites acquired Greek pottery, Near Eastern luxury objects, and other goods through Mediterranean exchange, while Etruscan metalwork, craft production, and local resources contributed to their wealth. In some regions, mineral resources, especially metals, helped make Etruscan communities powerful and attractive trading partners. Imagine an Etruscan harbor at dusk. Ships pull near the shore. Amphorae are unloaded. Bronze vessels catch the last light. A Greek-painted cup passes from one hand to another, not as a museum object, but as a desirable thing in a living world. Foreign goods arrive, but they do not simply replace local culture. They are chosen, adapted, displayed, buried, reimagined. An imported image can enter an Etruscan tomb and take on Etruscan meaning. A foreign alphabet can be reshaped for an Etruscan language. A Mediterranean style can become part of a local identity. This is how cultures live. They are not sealed jars. They breathe through contact. The Etruscans breathed deeply. And yet, they remain themselves. Their art often feels full of movement. Their tomb paintings can seem less stiff than some other ancient styles, more intimate, more social, more immediate. We see banquets, dancers, musicians, athletes, writers, gestures of touch and display. We see elite life, of course, not the whole society. The poor are quieter in the archaeological record. Ordinary labor is less visible than aristocratic memory. But even this tells us something. Etruscan elites invested heavily in death as a place for identity. A tomb could be a family monument, a statement of lineage, a sacred house, a memory chamber, a claim to belonging among the powerful dead. In places like Cerveteri, vast necropolises resemble cities of the dead, with tumuli and tombs arranged along paths. Some tomb interiors imitate domestic architecture, carved with beams, beds, chairs, and household forms. It is as if the world beneath the earth mirrored the world above it. The living built houses for the dead. And in doing so, they built memory into stone. This is one of the great emotional motifs of Etruscan civilization. Life and death are close. The tomb is not only an ending. It is a place where the living continue to meet the dead through ritual, image, name, and offering. Why do the painted tombs feel so alive? Perhaps because they were not painted for us. They were painted for a society that believed memory had work to do. A banquet on a wall could remind the living of status and family. A musician could summon atmosphere for the dead. A dancing figure could hold movement inside stillness. A name could resist disappearance. We should not pretend we know every intention. But we can feel the human need behind it. Do not let us vanish. Remember us in color. Remember us in music. Remember us together. The Etruscan world was also deeply religious, at least as later ancient writers described it and as archaeology suggests through temples, sacred spaces, votive offerings, inscriptions, and ritual objects. Greek and Roman authors often portrayed the Etruscans as especially skilled in divination, reading the will of the gods through signs in nature, including lightning, birds, and the examination of sacred patterns. Some of these descriptions come from outsiders, especially Roman writers looking back at Etruscan ritual knowledge. We should treat them carefully. Outsider accounts can preserve real information, but also exaggerate, simplify, or reshape another culture. Still, it is clear that Etruscan religious specialists were important and that divination played a major role in how the Etruscans were remembered. They watched the sky for meaning. They studied lightning. They read signs. They mapped sacred order onto the world. In later Roman tradition, Etruscan experts were associated with ritual knowledge that Romans themselves respected and sometimes consulted. This is one of the bridges between Etruria and Rome, not conquest alone, not imitation alone, but ritual inheritance. Imagine an Etruscan priest on a high place at dawn. The city is quiet behind him. The air is cool. Clouds gather over distant hills. A bird crosses the pale sky. A flash of lightning appears far away, silent at first, then followed by a low sound moving through the valley. To us, lightning is weather. To ancient religious imagination, it could be a message. The sky was not empty. It was written in signs. The task of the ritual specialist was to read them. This kind of worldview is difficult for modern people to enter fully, but we can approach it gently. For the Etruscans, as for many ancient peoples, human life was embedded in a sacred order. The world was not divided neatly into nature and religion. Birds, storms, birth, death, boundaries, temples, rituals, and political decisions could all belong to a pattern watched by gods. If you wanted to found a city, make a decision, begin a war, build a temple, or interpret disaster, you might seek signs. Not because people lacked intelligence, but because they believed the universe was alive with meaning. This belief shaped power. Those who could interpret signs held authority. A city that knew how to read the gods could claim guidance. A ruler advised by ritual experts could act with sacred confidence. A ceremony performed correctly could restore balance after fear. And here again, we see why Rome would later take Etruscan knowledge seriously. Rome became famous for law, order, discipline, and public ritual. But the ritual world of early Rome did not grow in isolation. It stood among older Italian traditions, including Etruscan ones. The Etruscans also built temples, though many were made partly of perishable materials and survive mostly through foundations, terracotta decoration, and later descriptions. Their temples differed in important ways from Greek stone temples and contributed to architectural traditions later associated with central Italy and Rome. Think of a sacred building on high ground. Its roof decorated with painted terracotta figures. Bright once, not white and ruinous as we might imagine now. The colors vivid. The gods present. The people approaching with offerings. The boundary between civic life and sacred life thin, almost invisible. A temple was not only a place of worship. It was a place where a city understood itself in relation to powers beyond human control. And the Etruscans, with their careful attention to signs and rituals, built a world in which power and sacred order were closely linked. This made them influential. But influence is not the same as simplicity. Rome did not merely copy the Etruscans like a child copying an older neighbor. The relationship was more complex. Rome borrowed, adapted, resisted, absorbed, and transformed. Etruscan culture itself was also changing through contact with Greeks, Phoenicians, Italians, and others. Ancient history is not a straight line. It is a conversation across generations. And the Etruscans were one of the major voices in that conversation. Their wealth could be seen in tomb goods, bronze objects, jewelry, fine pottery, imported luxury items, chariots in some burials, weapons, mirrors, and decorated vessels. These objects tell us not only about trade, but about identity, taste, status, gender, family, and memory. A bronze mirror might carry an engraved scene. A piece of jewelry might display craftsmanship and rank. A banquet set might speak of elite life and social performance. Every object asks a question. Who held this? Who gave it? Why was it buried? What did it mean to the living? What did they believe it would mean to the dead? The past becomes intimate in such questions. Not only kings and cities, but hands. Faces. Choices. A family placing a cup in a tomb. A craftsman polishing bronze. A woman wearing jewelry in life, then being remembered with it in death. A child learning the name of an ancestor from a painted chamber. We should not romanticize the Etruscans as peaceful dreamers. They lived in a real ancient world of power, hierarchy, competition, warfare, labor, wealth inequality, and political struggle. Their cities were not fantasy places. They were complex societies with elites, workers, dependents, and conflicts we cannot always see clearly. But the traces they left are unusually vivid. They make the Etruscan world feel close enough to touch. A dancer in a tomb. A name on stone. A bronze mirror. A temple roof. A city wall on a hill. A road leading toward Rome. And that road matters. Because while Etruscan cities flourished, Rome was growing to the south. At first, Rome was not destined in any visible way to overshadow them. It was one city in a competitive landscape. But it learned from that landscape. It moved within it. It fought, traded, married, borrowed, adapted, and gradually expanded. Ancient traditions remembered Etruscan kings in early Rome, especially the Tarquins. Scholars debate the historical details, but the tradition itself points toward strong Etruscan involvement or influence in Rome's early development. Symbols later associated with Roman authority, such as certain ceremonial forms and insignia, were linked by ancient writers to Etruscan origins or influence. We do not need to make the claim too simple. It is enough to say this. Rome rose in a world already shaped by Etruscan power. And in that world, Rome absorbed more than territory. It absorbed forms of authority, ritual habits, architectural ideas, religious expertise, images of power, perhaps even ways of imagining what a city could be. By the end of this part, the Etruscan world stands before us not as a vanished mystery alone, but as a living civilization whose influence would flow into the future, even as its own voice became harder to hear. Their cities stood on hills. Their tombs glowed underground. Their ships touched distant shores. Their priests watched lightning. Their families carved names into stone. Their artists painted the dead as if life continued in color, music, and movement. And yet, beyond the southern horizon, the younger city was beginning to rise. Rome. Still learning. Still forming. Still shaped by neighbors older and wealthier than itself. The Etruscans did not disappear in one sudden moment. Their world was slowly drawn into the expanding Roman one through conflict, alliance, absorption, and transformation over centuries. But before that long process was complete, there was a time when the future was not yet Roman. A time when the older civilization still held the hills. And a question waited in the valley between them. Would Rome erase the Etruscan world? Or carry it forward under another name? Rome did not rise above an empty land. It rose from a crowded one. From hills already watched by older gods. From roads already worn by older feet. From river crossings, sacred groves, rival towns, family tombs, market paths, coastal trade, and city walls that had stood before Rome became a name powerful enough to fill the world. And this is where the story becomes quieter, and more mysterious. Because Rome became so great in memory that it almost changed the past behind it. Later, when people looked back, they saw Rome everywhere. Roman roads. Roman law. Roman temples. Roman armies. Roman language. Roman power. But beneath that power, older layers remained. The story of Rome is not only the story of what Rome created. It is also the story of what Rome inherited. What it adapted. What it absorbed. What it renamed. What it carried forward so completely that the older source became almost invisible. The Etruscans were one of those older sources. They did not create Rome alone. Rome was not simply an Etruscan city wearing a Latin name. That would be too simple. Rome was shaped by many influences: Latin communities, Sabine neighbors, Greek contact, local Italian traditions, and its own internal development. It grew through conflict, alliance, adaptation, ambition, geography, and time. But the Etruscans mattered deeply. They stood close to Rome in space. They stood early in Rome's story. And they offered models of urban life, ritual authority, symbols of power, religious practice, craftsmanship, architecture, and political display that helped shape the world in which Rome became Rome. To understand that, imagine early Rome again. Not marble. Not empire. Not the city of emperors. Imagine hills above the Tiber. Wooden buildings. Clay roofs. Smoke. Animal pens. Sacred boundaries. Paths worn into the earth. A city growing in a place where Latin, Sabine, Etruscan, and broader Mediterranean worlds could meet. To the north, Etruscan cities were wealthy and powerful. Their elites buried the dead in painted tombs and monumental chambers. Their artisans worked bronze, terracotta, gold, and stone. Their temples rose with colored decoration. Their religious experts read signs in lightning, birds, and sacred ritual patterns. Their cities knew Mediterranean exchange. Their symbols carried prestige. And Rome, young and ambitious, stood close enough to learn. Ancient Roman tradition remembered a period of kings before the Republic, and among those kings were figures associated with Etruscan origin or influence, especially the Tarquins. We should not treat every story of Rome's kings as exact history. These traditions were shaped by later memory, political meaning, legend, and moral storytelling. But they preserve something important. Even the Romans imagined that early Rome had been connected to Etruscan power. They remembered Etruscan names in the royal past. They remembered foreign influence inside their own beginning. They remembered, however uneasily, that Rome's oldest story was not purely Roman. This matters because origin stories are never innocent. A society chooses how to remember itself. Rome later celebrated its toughness, discipline, law, and destiny. It told stories of founders, wars, virtue, betrayal, and divine favor. But beneath those stories lived another memory, the memory of older neighboring powers that had helped shape the city's early form. The Etruscan inheritance can be seen, carefully, in several areas. Architecture, ritual, urban display, religious expertise, symbols of authority. The relationship was not simple copying. It was transformation. An idea moved from one culture into another and changed as it entered Roman life. Like a river crossing new ground. Take architecture and sacred space. Etruscan temple forms, with their high podiums, deep porches, terracotta decoration, and front-facing emphasis, influenced early Italic and Roman temple design. Roman temples did not simply reproduce Etruscan temples forever, and later Roman architecture absorbed many Greek elements as well. But in the early period, Etruscan and Central Italian traditions helped shape how sacred buildings looked and functioned. Imagine a Roman temple rising in an early city. Its foundations are lifted above the ground. Steps lead upward from the front. The building faces outward, commanding approach and attention. Color once brightens its roofline. Terracotta figures stand above. To later eyes, ruins become pale and broken. But in the ancient world, temples were not colorless shadows. They were vivid, painted, ceremonial, alive with ritual. Rome learned to build sacred power in visible form, and part of that visual language came from the older Italy around it. Then there were rituals. The Romans were famously careful with religious procedure. They believed that public acts had to be performed properly, with words, gestures, timing, and signs observed according to tradition. Etruscan religious specialists, known in later Roman sources for their skill in divination, remained respected in Rome for certain forms of sacred knowledge, especially interpretation of lightning and prodigies. Ancient writers described Etruscan disciplines connected with reading signs from the gods. Some details come from Roman perspectives and must be handled carefully. But the continued Roman interest in Etruscan ritual expertise suggests real influence and prestige. Picture a Roman official in a later age, faced with a strange omen. A lightning strike. An unusual birth. A frightening sign in the sky. The city wants meaning. The people want reassurance. The state wants order. And so experts in old ritual knowledge are consulted. The Etruscan voice, even after Etruscan political independence weakened, still speaks inside Rome's sacred life. This is how cultures survive absorption. Not always by keeping their old name. Sometimes by becoming necessary. A conquered or absorbed tradition may disappear from the surface, yet remain embedded in ceremonies, words, gestures, symbols, and ways of thinking. The past does not vanish. It changes names. Roman symbols of authority may also have older Italian and Etruscan connections. Ancient sources linked certain signs of power, such as the curule chair, purple-bordered garments, and the fasces carried by attendants, to Etruscan royal or ceremonial traditions. The details are debated, and later Roman memory may have shaped these claims. But the association itself is revealing. Rome imagined some of its own symbols of public authority as coming from Etruscan forms of power. Think of the fasces. A bundle of rods, sometimes with an axe, carried before magistrates as a sign of authority. In Roman hands, it became one of the most recognizable symbols of state power. But if its deeper ceremonial roots lie in the older Italian world, then every Roman magistrate walking behind that symbol was also walking behind a memory older than the Republic. This is not theft in a simple sense. It is inheritance turned into identity. Rome had an extraordinary ability to absorb. It did not always destroy what it conquered. Often, it transformed it and placed it inside a Roman frame. Gods could be renamed or identified with Roman gods. Rituals could be incorporated. Elites could become Roman citizens. Local traditions could continue in altered form. Languages could fade while names survived in inscriptions. A people could lose political independence and still leave traces in the civilization that absorbed them. The Etruscans experienced this over centuries. Their cities came into conflict with Rome, one by one, at different times and under different circumstances. Rome's expansion was gradual, not a single sudden erasure. Some Etruscan cities resisted. Some were defeated. Some entered alliances. Some were integrated. Over time, Roman political power spread across Etruria. But Etruscan identity did not vanish overnight. Their language continued to be used in inscriptions for centuries. Their families remained. Their religious expertise remained valued. Their cities continued, though increasingly within a Roman world. Their culture was not switched off like a lamp. It dimmed, blended, adapted, and was overshadowed. That is often how ancient civilizations disappear. Not by vanishing suddenly, but by becoming part of something else. Imagine an Etruscan city under Roman influence. The hill is the same. The tombs are still beneath the earth. Families still remember ancestors. The old roads still descend into valleys. But Latin appears more often. Roman political structures deepen. Young elites learn to move within Roman systems. Old gods are identified with Roman ones. Local customs continue, but their meaning shifts. A person may still feel Etruscan in family memory, religious habit, and ancestral place, while also living inside a Roman political world. Identity becomes layered. The old does not disappear. It becomes harder to separate. This is the emotional center of the story. Rome became eternal in memory, but it was built on older ground. And the older ground never stopped being there. Beneath Roman roads, there were earlier paths. Beneath Roman temples, older sacred habits. Beneath Roman symbols, older forms of power. Beneath Roman religion, many local and foreign currents. Beneath Roman greatness, the shadow of peoples whose names are less often spoken. The Etruscans are among the most vivid of them because their traces are so beautiful and so incomplete. Their tombs show us life, but do not explain every belief. Their inscriptions give us names, but not a full literature. Their cities left walls and necropolises, but not the same kind of written history Rome left behind. Their influence on Rome is clear in broad strokes, but difficult in every detail. They are close enough to see. Far enough to remain mysterious. And perhaps that is why they still hold us. If we had hundreds of Etruscan books, if their history survived like Roman histories, if their sacred writings had come down complete, they might feel less silent. But instead, we meet them through fragments. A painted dancer. A banquetier's smile. A carved sarcophagus. A bronze mirror. A name. A tomb road at Cerveteri. A chamber at Tarquinia. A city gate. A temple foundation. A Roman ritual that remembers an Etruscan expert. A story of kings whose truth is hidden beneath legend. Fragments invite listening. They ask us not to speak too loudly. They ask us to accept that the past is not always fully recoverable, even when it shaped everything that came after. Rome carried pieces of the Etruscan world forward, but it also changed them. That is the nature of inheritance. A child does not become the parent. A city does not become the civilization before it. An empire does not preserve everything it absorbs. It selects, reworks, renames, forgets, remembers. The Etruscan world, once powerful in its own right, became one of the deep layers inside Roman civilization. Some of its forms became Roman. Some of its names faded. Some of its practices endured as specialized knowledge. Some of its cities became Roman towns. Some of its tombs were sealed and waited beneath the earth. And above them, the Roman road crossed the land. That image matters. An old tomb below. A Roman road above. The dead beneath memory. The living above movement. The older world below the empire that overshadowed it. For travelers walking that road in Roman times, the Etruscan past may already have felt ancient. They might pass near a mound or necropolis without entering. They might know the land had belonged to older people. They might repeat stories of Etruscan kings, rituals, or strange religious books. They might fear or respect the old rites. But the road itself was Roman now. The power above ground had changed. Still, beneath the earth, the painted rooms remained. A dancer frozen in motion. A musician holding an instrument. A family reclining at a banquet. A bird crossing the painted wall. The dead still speaking in color while the world above learned a new language. This is how the past survives. Not always openly. Not always in triumph. Sometimes underground. Sometimes inside another culture's ceremonies. Sometimes as a symbol whose origin is half remembered. Sometimes as a word no one translates fully anymore. Sometimes as an image that remains after every explanation is gone. So what did Rome inherit from the Etruscans? It inherited parts of an older Italian vocabulary of power. It inherited ritual knowledge and respect for signs. It inherited architectural forms and sacred habits. It inherited symbols that helped make authority visible. It inherited neighbors, rivals, elites, artisans, cities, and traditions that became woven into Rome's own growth. But more than anything, Rome inherited a world already old. A world that taught it how to stand among other powers. A world that gave it rivals strong enough to shape it. A world whose gods, roads, tombs, and cities formed the landscape in which Rome learned ambition. Rome did not simply erase that world. It overcame parts of it. It absorbed parts of it. It carried parts of it forward. And then, because Rome became so vast, many of those older parts began to look Roman. This is one of history's quiet tricks. The victor becomes the frame through which we see everyone else. But if we soften our gaze, the older shapes return. The Etruscan hills north of Rome. The necropolises like cities of the dead. The tomb paintings alive with feasting and music. The inscriptions whispering names. The lightning watched for divine meaning. The symbols of authority that moved into Roman hands. The early kings remembered in uncertain tradition. The older Italy still present beneath the story of Rome. And as the night falls over central Italy, the land becomes layered again. The hills darken. The valleys fill with mist. The Tiber moves quietly toward the sea. Above ground, a Roman road crosses the old land, pale beneath the moon. Below ground, an Etruscan tomb rests in silence, its painted walls holding a feast that never ends. No one is dancing in the chamber now. No music sounds. No lamp burns. But the colors remain. Faded. Fragile. Still human. And somewhere between the road above and the tomb below, the truth of the story becomes clear. Rome was not the beginning. It was a beginning built on many endings, and many inheritances. Maybe the story of Rome is not only the story of what Rome created. Maybe it is also the story of what Rome remembered, absorbed, renamed, and carried forward. Because the past does not disappear. It changes names.